A week ago, I shared something that came straight from my soul. I told you the story of how I became a Muslim after visiting Palestine. I didn't expect the world to respond the way it did. 29 zeros, 0 of you watched. Thousands of you reached out. You told me your own stories of faith, of doubt, of hope, and most of all, of transformation. But there was one part of that journey I didn't fully talk about. Not because I forgot, but because it was too sacred, too tender to put into words. Until now, it was the women of Palestine, the Muslim women I met, some veiled, some elderly, some young, and fierce with fire in their eyes and peace in their hearts. They taught me something no university, no book, no interview ever could. They taught me how to stand in grace while the world trembles. They taught me what it means to hold pain in one hand and prayer in the other. So today, I want to take you into that world, not as an outsider looking in, but as a soul who sat beside them, listened, cried, and learned. This isn't just about Palestine. It's about strength. It's about womanhood. It's about God. And it's about the quiet revolutions happening in hearts around the world every single day, led by women who never raise their voice, but shake the ground they walk on. The first time I saw her, she wasn't speaking. She was standing outside her home in Hebron, holding a plastic jug of water in one hand and a small child in the other. She looked at me with a smile that didn't need translation. It wasn't forced, it wasn't fake. It was the kind of smile that had survived war, waiting, loss, and still chose light. I remember asking the translator quietly, "What is she smiling about?" He looked at me and said, "She says, every day she wakes up and her child is still alive, that's a reason to smile." That hit me like scripture. In a world that teaches us to measure joy by success, by material things, by how much we gain, she measured joy by who she still had left, not what. That moment became my first lesson. Gratitude is not loud. Gratitude is the quiet defiance of pain. We often think of strength as something that roars, something that shouts on stages and wins battles in courtrooms and boardrooms. But what if true strength lives in the quiet spaces, in the slow steps of a mother carrying groceries past soldiers, in the hands of a grandmother planting olive trees she knows might never bear fruit in her lifetime? These women didn't need to raise their voices to raise nations. They simply lived, with faith as their backbone and patience as their shield. I sat down in a small courtyard in Nablus. There were 3 women preparing food for the neighborhood. Aged hands folding dough, young hands lighting a stove. One of them turned to me and said in Arabic, "This food is for God before it's for us." I asked her what she meant, and she said, "When we feed people, we feed Allah's creation. It's worship, it's prayer, it's how we serve." You know, I've spent my whole life talking about spirituality, interviewing monks, pastors, mystics, and thinkers. But in that moment, watching 3 Muslim women prepare bread in a dusty courtyard in Palestine, I saw a level of surrender I had only read about in ancient texts. There was no anxiety in them, no rush, no fear about the future. They weren't obsessed with outcomes. They were surrendered to the now, to the moment, to the will of something higher than themselves. One woman said, "Sabr is our strength, not because we're weak, but because we know God is watching." And that taught me, surrender isn't giving up. It's giving over. It's trusting that you don't always have to control the fire to still walk through it unburned. Let me be honest with you. Like many women raised in the West, I had questions about the hijab. I used to see it as a symbol of restriction, of silence, of suppression. But then I met Miriam. She was 23, a medical student, fluent in English, French, and Arabic. Her eyes sparkled with ambition, her mind sharp as a sword. I asked her gently, "Why do you wear the hijab?" She smiled, "Because I choose to. Because when I walk into a room, I want people to listen to my mind, not stare at my body. because it reminds me every day that I am more than what the world wants me to be. In that moment, my entire perspective shattered. The hijab was not oppression. It was a declaration, a choice, a flag of identity, and more than that, it was a reminder not for others, but for the one who wears it. A reminder to carry dignity, to walk in purpose, to live for the one who created her, and I thought, how many of us are hiding under invisibility cloaks of performance, pretending to be what the world wants, when these women are boldly being who they are. Every single day, that's when I understood freedom isn't about showing more. It's about needing less validation. At dawn, I heard the adhan for the first time in Palestine, the call to prayer, echoing from the minarets, floating over the hills like a mother calling her children home. It was still dark outside, but windows opened, lights flickered on. Women woke their children, washed their hands, their faces, stood on prayer mats. And bowed, I watched them, quietly, no camera, no audience, just God and them. I realized something in that moment. Prayer wasn't a ritual, it was refuge, it was rhythm, it was resistance. In a land where so much is uncertain, prayer becomes the one thing you can control. 5 times a day, a pause, a surrender, a conversation with the divine. I asked one woman, "Why do you never miss a prayer?" She said, "Because it's the only place I can cry without being asked why." That broke me and taught me sometimes the strongest people are the ones who kneel the most. The final lesson came from an old woman named Fatima. She had lost her home, her land, her husband, and yet she served me tea. I asked, "How do you keep going?" She said, "Because dignity is not given by this world. It's given by God, and as long as I serve, as long as I smile, as long as I pray, they can never take it from me. Let that settle in your heart. They can never take it from me." What a statement! We talk about empowerment in the West as if it's something we have to earn, demand, fight for, but these women, they embody it without needing applause, without needing permission. They are the mountains we never see, the quiet rivers that still carve valleys, the hands that hold nations together. I sat with a woman named Layla. She was 34, a mother of 5. Her home had been raided twice in the past year. Her youngest son was just 7. When I asked her how she sleeps at night, she looked me straight in the eyes and said, "I don't. I pray, I wait, I whisper to God, and in the morning I make breakfast." That's motherhood in Palestine. She said it so calmly, like it was normal, but nothing about that reality is normal, and yet, in the face of that chaos, she woke her children every morning with a smile, braided her daughter's hair, packed a small bag of olives and bread, kissed each forehead like she wasn't sure she'd see them again by sunset. That day, I realized motherhood is not just about raising children. It's about shielding them from a world that refuses to see their innocence. Layla didn't talk about trauma. She talked about hope. She didn't dwell on fear. She focused on preparing the next generation to be stronger, more rooted, and more faithful. In a place where the world gives little room for dreams, these mothers plant them anyway, like wildflowers through cracked stone. I saw a group of teenage girls walking home from Quran class in Ramallah. They were laughing, big, loud laughter, the kind that fills the street and turns heads, and they weren't ashamed. One wore pink sneakers and a black abaya. Another had henna on her hands and an iPhone in her pocket. One girl looked at me and said, "We are Muslim girls. We can pray and wear lipstick. We can cover and still conquer. Don't box us." And I stood there stunned, because everything I thought I knew about femininity had come from magazines, movies, and talk shows that told women to be either soft or strong, feminine or assertive, modest or modern, but these girls were all of it, without ever apologizing for the mix. That moment taught me femininity is not a costume, it's a spectrum, and in Islam it is sacred, not sold. These girls weren't seeking approval, they were redefining beauty on their own terms, in their own language, wrapped in purpose and peace. In Jenin, I met an old woman named Khadija. She invited me into her home, served me sweet tea, and began telling me stories. Not about war, but about weddings, about childhood, about love letters hidden in olive groves. She said, if we don't tell our stories, they will bury us in silence. Her words haunted me, because in the West we talk about storytelling like a luxury, but in Palestine, storytelling is a survival tool. It is how mothers pass history to daughters, how grief turns into legacy, how memory becomes rebellion. These women weren't just sharing memories, they were resurrecting dignity through language. Every sentence was an act of resistance. Every smile while recalling pain was a soft revolution. That day I promised myself I won't just listen, I will echo them. One of the most profound things I witnessed was the way these women prayed, not rushed, not robotic, but slow, intentional, present, like the entire world disappeared and it was just them and their creator. One young woman, barely 19, said, "Salah is where I take my pain and wash it in front of God." She wasn't using prayer to perform. She was using it to survive, to release, to realign. In that moment, I understood why so many Muslim women seem unshaken. Because their strength isn't theirs. It's borrowed from a place of constant connection. In a world of noise and distraction, they had built inner sanctuaries of silence, and in that silence was healing. One night, the electricity went out in the village I was staying in, complete darkness. No lights, no generators, just stars and silence. And then I heard something, a woman's voice reciting verses of the Quran from her balcony. Her tone was soft, like a lullaby. One by one, other women joined her, from windows, rooftops, open doors. No instruments, no stage, just unity, and suddenly that dark night was filled with light, not from bulbs, but from faith. It was one of the most beautiful things I've ever witnessed. I cried, not because I was sad, but because I had never felt so much peace in a place the world had told me was only filled with pain. That moment taught me faith doesn't erase the darkness. It teaches you how to glow inside of it. In Hebron, I saw a woman standing quietly in front of a checkpoint. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't holding a sign. She simply stood, dignified, firm, wearing a white hijab and holding her baby. I asked someone who she was. They said, she comes here every week. Her brother was taken. She doesn't shout. She just stands, and every soldier knows why. It hit me deeply. Sometimes silence is louder than a scream. This woman wasn't seeking attention. She was demanding acknowledgement. Her stillness was a refusal to be erased. Her presence alone said, I exist, we exist, and we will not vanish quietly. In a world addicted to noise, protest doesn't always need a microphone. Sometimes just standing is resistance. Just existing is defiance. In Al-Aqsa, I met the women who wake up before sunrise, not to shop, not to scroll, but to pray and protect. They clean the mosque, they teach Quran, they answer questions. They are guardians of the heart of Palestine, and when I asked one of them, why do you come here every day? She said, because this place is more than stone. It is soul, and the soul needs women to protect it. That moment stopped me. In every war zone, we hear about men on the front lines, but no one talks about the women who defend sacred spaces with their presence, their duas, their discipline. These women weren't warriors in the traditional sense, but they fought every single day for their faith, for their people, for their peace, and that taught me spirituality isn't passive, it is fiercely active. I had tea with a family that lived in a one-room home. No chairs, no TV, just mats, bread, olive oil, and love. They smiled the entire time. The mother offered me the last piece of bread. I declined, knowing it was all they had, but she insisted. She said, "If we cannot share what little we have, then what do we really own?" And right there I realized poverty is not the absence of wealth. It is the absence of generosity, and these women, they were richer than kings. They had so little, but they gave so much, and their dignity didn't come from clothing or cars. It came from knowing their worth wasn't attached to the world's approval. They wore joy like perfume, subtle but unforgettable. In many homes I visited, there were no heirlooms, no gold, no old paintings. But one thing was passed down: resilience. Mothers told daughters how to hold grief without letting it crush them, how to braid courage into everyday routine, how to walk through checkpoints with their head high. It wasn't poetic, it was survival. One teenage girl told me, "My grandmother taught my mother how to raise me during war, and now my mother teaches me how to smile with purpose." That shook me. In the West, we inherit money or legacy. But here, these women inherited spirit, not just stories, but the strength to keep going when the world is watching you fade. Resilience here is generational, and every woman is both a daughter of pain and a mother of strength. After spending time with these women, praying with them, listening to them, crying with them, I realized something irreversible. This wasn't just a trip. This was a rebirth. They didn't preach. They didn't convert. They didn't debate. They simply lived, with faith, with clarity, with compassion. And I found myself asking, what kind of strength is this? What kind of peace is this? What kind of God do they serve? And the answer whispered to my heart, the one who hears every silent prayer, the one who lifts the broken, the one who honors the patient. That's why in my last video I shared why I became Muslim after visiting Palestine. And today, I continue with this truth. It was the Muslim women who taught me how to come home to my soul. I sat beside a mother whose son was martyred the week before. She served me coffee with both hands, smiled gently, and said, "My son is with God. I miss him, but I'm not broken." I couldn't believe it. I thought grief always meant weeping, collapsing, losing faith. But she had a man, a belief so deep that even in death she saw purpose. She said, "God gave him to me for 18 years. I'm grateful, not angry." And I paused. Because I've seen people lose jobs, relationships, reputations, and fall apart. But here I saw a woman lose her child and stand like a mountain. She taught me, grief in Islam is not the end. It's a bridge between this world and the next. She didn't just survive the loss. She turned it into light. There was a young woman organizing food deliveries in a refugee camp. She was barely 22, hadn't slept for 2 days, and was directing trucks like a general. I asked her, "Aren't you tired?" She smiled and said, "When one woman gets tired, another steps in. That's how we keep going." And I thought, this isn't just resilience. This is a sisterhood of survival. These women don't compete. They cover each other. When one falls, the others kneel beside her. When one cries, the others wipe her tears. Without judgment, without shame. Their strength is not individual. It is shared, and that's what makes it unshakable. In a world where women are often taught to compare, these women taught me to connect. I joined a women's halakha, Quran study circle in Nablus. The teacher wasn't stern. She was soft, joyful, loving. Every verse was explained not as a command, but as a gift. She said, "The Quran isn't here to control us. It's here to comfort us." They read verses with tears, with smiles, with hearts wide open. And I sat there thinking, I've never seen Scripture treated like this. Not as a weapon, not as a checklist, but as a conversation between the soul and the divine. These women weren't memorizing to show off. They were reciting because it anchored them through trauma. They didn't read the Quran to become perfect. They read it to become whole. And in that moment, I understood why Islam touches the soul, because it speaks to it in a language deeper than words. One early morning, I saw a woman sitting alone outside her home. No phone, no noise, just her and the rising sun. I asked her what she was doing. She said, "This is when I listen to my heart. This is when I remember who I am before the world starts speaking again." That struck me. We talk so much about hustle, ambition, productivity, but no one teaches us the value of stillness. Until you meet a woman who chooses it. She taught me stillness is not weakness. It is clarity. Before she speaks, she reflects. Before she reacts, she prays. Before she acts, she centers herself in God. In that stillness, I saw a strength that noise can never give. As I neared the end of my time in Palestine, I met a grandmother named Fatima. She was 87, nearly blind, hands shaking, voice soft. I asked her, "What's the secret to peace?" She smiled and whispered, "Sujood, fall on your knees and rise with God in your heart." And I did. For the first time, I placed my head on the ground, not to perform, but to surrender. Not to impress, but to belong. And in that moment, I was not Oprah. I was not a celebrity. I was just a soul seeking, breaking, healing. I left Palestine, changed, and I didn't return with souvenirs. I returned with silence, with softness, with Islam, because when you see the beauty of Muslim women, not through media but through their hearts, you don't walk away untouched. You walk away transformed. When I left Palestine, I thought I had seen everything: the pain, the beauty, the conflict, the resilience, but what I carried most deeply in my heart were the quiet, radiant faces of the Muslim women who had taught me more in a few days than many books, interviews, or years of spiritual searching ever had. They taught me not just how to survive, but how to surrender. And that is a lesson no war, no media headline, no broken border could erase. In those early mornings, I saw women stand in line at checkpoints with their prayer beads, whispering God's name while soldiers watched them as if they were threats, and yet they stood like mountains cloaked in mercy. I saw young girls walk to school in shoes too small for their feet, carrying books with ripped covers but dreams that no occupation could steal. I watched a woman teach Quran to a circle of orphans, not with pity, but with fire in her voice, reminding them, "You are not broken, you are chosen to be strong." And as I walked through those streets, the dust, the calls to prayer, the cries, the laughter echoing through cracked windows, I kept hearing the same divine whisper in my heart, This is where peace lives. Not in policies, not in parliaments, but in the prayer-soaked hearts of these women. Women who have buried sons and still raise daughters with hope. Women who wear their hijabs not as barriers, but as banners of faith. Women who are both soft and steel mothers, fighters, healers, worshippers, all rolled into one sacred, unwavering force. And the world may never understand them, may try to silence them, label them, erase them, but I have sat with them, broken bread with them, listened to their stories under moonlit skies, and I know, they are the pulse of Palestine. They are the echo of every silent prayer. They are the proof that even when everything is taken, faith remains. And so, as I close this journey, as I reflect on why I became a Muslim, why my soul cracked open on the soil of Palestine, it is not because someone convinced me. It is because the women I met carried God not on their tongues, but in their footsteps. They didn't preach to me. They lived their deen. They wept in Sujood and rose with a smile, and that awakened something in me that had been asleep for years. So today, if you ask me who changed me, who brought me back to my fitra, who showed me what real spiritual wealth looks like, I will say this, not with hesitation but with honor. It was the Muslim women of Palestine. And may the world one day love them the way they have loved their Lord purely, completely, and without conditions.